second leftover from therapy from today's therapy session. So this one is about yoga. So I started a yoga class on Friday, dissociated my way through it, the goal being to become more embodied, but being embodied is really hard for me, which I knew going in. But so we get talking about like kind of what worked in the class and what didn't, and I had a couple of takeaways from them. One was, at one point I mentioned how I knew going in that I didn't want anybody to be behind me, and so I took a spot in the very back of the classroom. And our therapist asked if there were any like particular poses that I found like particularly uncomfortable, like emotionally uncomfortable. And I said like no, because like I was in the back of the class, so nobody could see me because everybody was like facing forward in front of me. And he's like, but you had that thought? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, if you had that thought that like nobody can see me, so this is okay, then that means you were uncomfortable. And that totally makes sense. But I completely missed the forest for the trees on that. Like, and it's so frustrating because I tend to overthink things, and I try to like really be aware of myself and to like analyze myself and things like that. But yeah, I did totally have that thought, and I also totally convinced myself that I wasn't particularly uncomfortable with any particular pose. So my ability to like catch my own discomfort is not great. But now that I'm consciously aware that if I have that thought of being like grateful that nobody can see me or whatever, then that means I'm actually somewhat uncomfortable with this pose and should skip that pose or whatever. We also talked about clothing, and how I wore clothes that were like as loose as I felt like were like acceptable for still being like yoga class clothing. So like I wore like joggers and kind of a fitted t-shirt, and he like pointed out that he's never heard of a yoga class that has a dress code, and so like, what does that mean? And I was like, yeah, but like you kind of are supposed to wear like athletic wear, and so for women that's usually leggings, maybe yoga pants, and either like a sports bra or like a tank top or a t-shirt. And so I went like as loose as I could within that structure of like rules. And he pointed out that those aren't actually rules, and that I could wear like really oversized like sweatshirt and sweatpants if I wanted to, like that there are no rules. And yeah, like that's another thing, like I just, in a lot of little ways in life, like I just kind of assume that there are these rules, like I have all these shoulds and shouldn'ts, that if I were to stop and think about it, then I would recognize that like, yeah, that's like, there's not really, short of like laws and stuff, like everything is made up, like you can do whatever you want. But I don't usually stop to think that, like my brain, I don't know, just kind of like makes these like rigid expectations and doesn't even recognize that I'm boxing myself in more than I need to. So anyway, so the recommendation on that was for future yoga classes to like only think, what am I going to feel the most comfortable wearing, and wear that. He also pointed out that like if the goal is to be embodied, then that kind of really requires slowing down. And the class didn't feel very slowed down. Like we both felt kind of rushed through most of it, to be honest. And I think that's just because we are brand new, we don't know poses, and so they're like saying like, okay, now do this pose and inhale on this part and exhale on that part. But because we don't know the pose, we're having to like look at the instructor and other people and be like, okay, where is their arm, where is their leg, and figure out the pose. And it's hard to figure out the pose while also focusing on your breathing. Like I don't know, I have ADHD, so maybe that part's just me, but I can't really do both at once. Like I think once I know the poses, then I would not have to think about the pose and then would be able to think about my breathing, but currently I can't really do both. And so anyway, he suggested slowing down as slow as we need to in order to be able to actually like be in our bodies during it and not just like, okay, what's next, what's next. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Seems how our ultimate goal is to be embodied. And that just kind of requires me to not care about not keeping pace with like the rest of the class or whatever. But the instructor was great, like at the beginning and multiple times throughout was like, you can do it this way, or here's an adaptive way to do it, or here's like an advanced way to do it. Do what feels best for your body. Like there's definitely not like a rigid expectation that you do everything at the same pace or anything like that. It's all just nonsense rules that I've made in my head. But also like it's a class that we're paying for, so like they're what, it doesn't hurt the instructor or anybody else if we're not perfectly on pace with other people.